Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. My name is Joe Thomas. We've got a busy program set up for us here, and we're going to get into some of the School Choice Week stuff coming up in a little while. But the Nunez Memo sucked a lot of the air out of the room nationwide, and we have got a great lineup of guests ready to take us inside the memo from both D.C. and here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We begin with the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, nonetheless, Virginia's 6th District Congressman Bob Goodlatte. Bob, good morning. Thanks for joining us. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. Good morning, Joe.
Most troubling to me, and maybe I'm overstating this, is this feeling that I have that this FISA judge just sort of on the say-so of the people who had signed off on this Steele dossier, saying, okay, if it's good with you, it's good for me. And it didn't seem like there was the scrutiny that I would hope a judge would apply when somebody's applying for a wiretap or a search warrant or anything like that. Is that one of your big concerns, or am I missing something?
Well, it is not a big concern in terms of how the judge handled it. Based on what we know at this point, it is a major concern how the Bureau handled it in submitting it to the court. Remember, this is a court where you're issuing warrants to surveil people. Oftentimes, it's a foreign suspect who might be a terrorist, but it also could include investigations that involve national security, and the whole Russia investigation relates to their potential interference with our election last year. So there's nobody in the courtroom representing Carter Page when this warrant is issued. And that's the big problem with these cases. And in many cases, you have to do that because otherwise people, terrorists will change their activities or so on if they are aware that something like that's going on. So what you've got is a situation where the FBI took information that was bought and paid for by the Democratic National Committee, the Clinton campaign, and through their lawyer provided to the FBI, actually through a company called Fusion GPS, provided to the FBI. And then the FBI takes it. It's highly suspect in terms of its content, prepared by somebody who was highly biased, Christopher Steele, against the Trump campaign, and then provided to the court without any disclosure of all of the connections to the competing political campaign. So the judge doesn't have anybody asking questions that they might know representing somebody else, and the judge has to look at it on the face. Well, they do, and I think they do a good job. But if not all the facts are there, a judge is liable to say, "Okay, I'm going to grant this."
Well, then it sounds like you're saying that it's not so much a structural issue as it is the character of the people who are in these offices and what their level of corruptibility might have been. And I mean that in the essence of the word. Anything that changes your opinion just from right and wrong.
And let's be clear about this. The FBI is the world's premier law enforcement organization. Tens of thousands of men and women every day work hard to make sure that we are kept safe, that crimes are solved, that terrorist attacks are prevented, and this is not about them. But there are several people in key positions in the FBI who basically weaponized a campaign opposition research hit piece and turned it into an opportunity to surveil a United States citizen.
Right.
And that is what the American people needed to know about in this case.
So
that's very serious.
It comes down to who's at the head of the Department of Justice, who's the Attorney General, and the vetting of those folks, it seems, Bob. And that's why I always point out the fact that character in these election campaigns often is an important factor. Is like, who are you choosing and who's going to be there to watch out for you? But does it also speak to the deep state, if you will, or the swamp defending itself against what it might have seen as an outsider coming in to tell them, how to run their business that they know how to do better?
Well, that is a concern because the fact of the matter is Christopher Wray, the current director of the FBI, was not in any way involved in any of this. He is, in my opinion, an honorable individual but I think he has way too aggressively attempted to defend what is a serious misuse of power that occurred under the watch of his predecessor. And as a result of that, we need to make absolutely sure that the public is aware of this. And that's why this memo was taken from the original source documents and prepared. And Democrats want to have their own memo disputing it. I think once it's cleared of any sources and methods, that should be released as well. Nor is this about the Mueller investigation. I think that should continue separate and apart. Mr. Mueller needs to be paying attention to the same kinds of accusations of bias. As you know, one of the members of his team was removed last year, Mr. Peter Strzok. And if you've read some of the texts that he and his girlfriend, who also worked in the Bureau, were sending back and forth, you know how serious this matter is in terms of bias.
There is a law, and Bob, I know we have short time, and I appreciate you taking some time out with us, Bob Goodlatte. There is a law that prohibits government employees from engaging in political activities vis-a-vis joining a political party, becoming a campaign operative for somebody like that. Are these folks guilty of some violation of that? I'm forgetting the name of the law that prohibits that, but could this be seen as that?
Well, people are entitled to their own opinions, and they are entitled to, communicate with each other about that. But when you have this kind of extreme bias, and then you connect it with actions that were taken, and again, this investigation has a long way to go, but discussions about insurance policies and secret societies and so on does not build confidence that there was not a group of people in the FBI that were handling the investigation of Hillary Clinton in a completely different manner than the investigation of the Trump campaign. And that kind of bias infecting actions in the department is what it is so critically important that the FBI avoid, because the American people need to be able to trust this premier law enforcement organization.
Bob, thank you so much for your time, and we'll keep your number on dial, and as more comes out, I appreciate it, sir.
Thanks, Joe.
Joining us now from the Virginia House of Delegates, where it just came out of a committee, but also running for the Republican Party of Virginia nomination to run for U.S. Senate, Delegate Nick Freitas. Nick, thanks for taking some time out with us this morning. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, Joe. Thanks for having me on.
I wanted to ask you first, as a former or as a military man, the national security is something you sworn an oath to long before you ever took an oath of office. And when you look at the Nunez Memo and what it says about the way our national security on the homeland side can be manipulated with nothing much more than a wink and a handshake, it seems like, this judge is approving warrants just because somebody said so. And, well, I hold him in esteem. If you say so, here's a warrant. It's frightening that we live in a place that can happen.
Well, I think this is something we've been warning about for a long time, at least some of us. I mean, Congressman Tom Garrett, Senator Rand Paul, Senator Mike Lee. There's been some Democrats as well that have pointed out that this is the sort of program that there's a potential for corruption there. And I think that this memo demonstrates that corruption did in fact take place. And I think that Tim Kaine and Hillary Clinton financing a dossier that was then used to basically turn the federal government on a political opponent. And I understand that there might be some more information coming out, and if that does come out, I'll be happy to analyze that as well. But for right now, this looks like the sort of thing we've been warning about for a long time. I don't know of anybody that doesn't want to make sure that we give our intelligence community and our intelligence assets the ability and the tools that they need in order to effectively protect the United States, but not at the expense of the Constitution. And we've been arguing about this for years, and Tim Kaine recently voted to reauthorize this without any substantive reform. And so, yeah, it's a huge concern, and now we're at a point right now where I think we can point to something concrete and say this is what we've been talking about.
Well, and you bring up the fact that this was a presidential campaign in which our senator was party to. Will this be something in the Senate campaign, should you be the nominee, that you'll ask Tim Kaine to answer for? Because he's been mute on the subject. Mark Warner's been effusive, but Tim Kaine has been quiet.
No, absolutely. We have to bring it up, and we have to bring it up for two reasons. I mean, one is, again, going back to we want people to have the tools, not at the expense of the Constitution. Tim Kaine had an opportunity to take a stand on this, to stand with both members of his own party as well as people like Senators Rand Paul and Mike Lee, Congressman Tom Garrett, Congressman Amash, and say, look, we're not reauthorizing this until we see some substantive reforms that ensure that we're protecting Fourth Amendment rights. He chose not to do that. But again, this is also the man who I think, in a lot of ways is a nice guy. This is also a man that colluded with Hillary Clinton to disenfranchise millions of Bernie Sanders supporters, and we're starting to see this. We're starting to see this pattern now of people up in D.C. believing that the rules simply don't apply to them. And they've convinced themselves that if it means them getting into power, well, they don't mind shaving a little fat off the Constitution. And that's incredibly disturbing to me. So, no, this will definitely come up. And the thing that I would like to say on this as well is this really should be a bipartisan issue. And there have been Republicans that have been guilty of this as well, believing that when the other side is in power, well, now we want FISA reform. But when our side is in power, it's not a concern. Look, I'm sorry. I don't care who's in power. I want FISA reform. I don't care who's in power. I expect them to protect the Fourth Amendment. And if we have an executive branch that isn't willing to do so, then I expect our legislators to step up and defend the Constitution and defend their constituents. And unfortunately, I'm not seeing a lot of that in this area with respect to Tim Kaine. And maybe it's because he's very comfortable with a very powerful federal government. But those constitutional boundaries are in there for our protection. This is a very clear-cut case, I think, of a political party manipulating intelligence, manipulating the FISA court in order to turn their guns on a political opponent. And it deserves to be roundly condemned, and we need to, once again, take a look at this and figure out what reforms are necessary in order to ensure things like this don't happen.
Well, and certainly I brought up, I said, what if Sidney Blumenthal's documents, quote unquote documents that said Barack Obama wasn't a citizen had been brought to a FISA judge by Mike Mukasey in 2008 and used to surveil the Obama campaign. I think you'd find some people, but you mentioned Tom was just on with us, talked about Ron Wyden and some of the Democrats who are on this. We saw them stand, some of them, like mainly the backbenchers, as they're called, during the State of the Union. Some of the guys in the way back of the room and gals did applaud at certain points of the State of the Union address. Is this something Senator Nick Freitas would work on, bringing those people out from the cold and actually, getting to a place where things like the Fourth Amendment shouldn't be a political football?
Absolutely. And we've done this, we've managed to do this in the General Assembly, working on things that are, criminal justice reform and reining in the power of the government and ensuring that people are provided due process of law before they either have their property stolen or their lives invaded to. Again, we want to separate the people that are supposed to be the targets of the FISA courts. Yeah. But we have to protect Fourth Amendment rights. So I think the other thing, too, that people need to understand is there's a lot of Democrats coming out now and saying, well, there's another memo and this. Okay, great. Let's have the other memo come out as well. I don't have a problem with that because ultimately this isn't a partisan issue. It's a constitutional one. And for everybody that wants to, potentially defend Senator Kaine on this, let me just ask you something. If you're concerned about the federal government having this power, as a Democrat, aren't you concerned about Donald Trump having this power? Mm-hmm, sure. And I give the president credit. The president released this memo knowing that it was going to result in, and hopefully result in, a reining in of FISA courts. And that's the approach that we should be taking in this, is that this is not a question of, I'm comfortable with my team's in power, but I'm not comfortable when the other team's in power. No, this is a straight Fourth Amendment issue, and we should all be unified in ensuring that constitutional protections are held up by both our executive and our legislative branches.
Nick, where can people find you online while session's going on? And we want to have you back to talk about session a little bit before crossover. But where can people find the Senate campaign online?
Sure, please go to Nick Freitas for VA on Facebook. NickForSenate.com is our website. But we keep up on social media every day on Twitter and on Facebook. It's a great place to get updates both about what's going on in session, what's going on with the campaign.
I appreciate it, sir. Thank you for taking time out with us today.
Thank you, Jeff.
Chairman of the Prince William County Board of Supervisors and Senate candidate for the Republican Party of Virginia nomination, Corey Stewart. Good morning, Corey. How you doing, sir?
Hey, good morning, Joe. Great to be on your show this morning.
Hey, I was down. We've decided for Groundhog's Day every year we're going to go down to the park around Robert E. Lee's statue to see if we see the statue's shadow there. And I was there this morning because somebody took the tarps off of the statues to catch you up on that one. But I wanted to ask you two things. Number one, about this Nunez Memo. You are in charge of a county. You've been reelected time and time again in a county where Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton did well, but you keep winning, even though you have a very strong stand on immigration and ICE and enforcement of our laws. Is the importance of being fair and even-handed with the application of justice one of the reasons you keep getting reelected in Prince William County? Because it seems like you're a pretty strong law and order guy, but it seems like the community respects you for it.
Yes, absolutely it is. I mean, people want fairness. They will vote. Here in Northern Virginia, which I've been able to win, I represent almost 500,000 people here. And, people respect strength. People respect, a leader who stands by their position, even if they disagree with it. And they respect a leader who's able to get things done, even if they're not of the same party as they are. And that's what I've done. But they want somebody who's going to be fair. And this whole thing about the memo, the investigation, this was supposed to be a problem for the Republican Party. It was supposed to be a problem for those who support President Trump. But now it's been flipped on its head, and now it's a problem not just for Democrats, but it's a big problem for Tim Kaine. Since keep in mind, it wasn't the Clinton campaign; it was the Clinton-Kaine campaign that was responsible for this, and that's why Tim Kaine is going to be wrapped around the axle, and we're going to make sure that he is come this November.
Well, one of the concerning things is the way the judges seem to just sort of, oh, okay, you vouch for this? Okay, good. Here's your warrant to wiretap people. That's chilling to think that judges take such a cavalier attitude towards due process and actually proving something, at least incontrovertibly, before they give a warrant to search your premises, whether you're a presidential campaign, a talk radio show host, or just some ex-cab driver living on some retirement benefits.
Yeah, it's the thing is that once upon a time, not too long ago, 10 years ago, the FBI, the Department of Justice, the FISA court, were seen as you never really questioned it. You always just assumed that these were American institutions that were above, way above any possible corruption, political influence. But unfortunately, 8 years of Obama changed all that, and then you have the Clinton campaign that's responsible, really, for the corruption of the DOJ, the FBI, unfortunately, and then the FISA court. So I think the Americans they know that they want it rooted out, they want it fixed, they want the FBI, the Department of Justice, to be operating above board. A non-political way, and they're going to be holding the Clinton-Kaine campaign and really all Democrats responsible for it.
Hey, Corey, let me ask you this then. What questions are you going to ask Tim Kaine regarding this to try to hold him to account for it during the campaign?
So what did you know? Well, I mean, why was it that you allowed the campaign to corrupt the FBI? Why was it that you allowed the campaign, to exert this influence on the FBI in a way that you knew was going to was wrong, to spy on not just your opponent, but really on an American citizens? Something that's never been done before in American history. So, this Boy Scout image of Tim Kaine, if he ever had one, it's over.
Corey, I appreciate it. Where can people find you online, sir?
CoreyStewart.com and on Facebook, Corey Stewart VA.
I appreciate it, sir. Thank you for taking some time and some thoughts on this. I appreciate it. We'll talk to you again very soon.
My pleasure, Joe.
Joining us from the Senate Conservatives Fund, he is Ken Cuccinelli, former Attorney General for the Commonwealth of Virginia. Good morning, Ken. How are you doing, sir?
Doing well.
Thank you for taking a little time out. Ken is on with us to talk about the Nunez Memo and its impact on the justice system. And the reason I started that way, Ken, is the most stunning thing to me in this is the ease with which, just under the I say so parameters, the judge said, okay, here's a warrant to surveil somebody's house, regardless whether it was a presidential campaign or not. It seems like the scrutiny that you would hope a judge, especially at a FISA court, but even at the Albemarle Circuit Court of Appeals would have, would be more strenuous than this.
Well, not only that, the thing I've found surprising to the point of annoying is that both the chairman of the committee, Nunez himself, at the bottom of page 1 of his memo and carrying over onto page 2, and then Trey Gowdy in a follow-up tweet, they both seem surprised that the national security and law enforcement agencies wouldn't share every bit of information they have, what they refer to as all material information, with the FISA court. And I half scoff, like, where have you guys been? Mm-hmm. And of course, Trey Gowdy is the person the Republicans look to in the House as sort of their prosecutor in chief, and Nunez is the head of the House Intelligence Committee, and they're both surprised by this. That gosh, they didn't tell them every little detail that was important. And now, as we do our Monday morning quarterbacking, the then Deputy Director McCabe has testified at some point in December of 2017 that, well, without this political information related to the dossier, we wouldn't have gone and gotten the warrant. But that apparently was not told to the FISA court. And my response to that is, well, duh. I mean,
is that a legal term?
It is when it reaches this point.
Yeah.
I'd go back to the Snowden revelations with you, Joe, and I remember that Congressman Sensenbrenner, who is the primary author of that part of the Patriot Act that was being used for the mass surveillance, the metadata gathering that you and I have talked about before, mm-hmm. that went on for years, from 2006 to 2015. And the congressman said, well, gosh, we never intended this, and I don't think this language allows this, and, et cetera, et cetera. So here you've got the writers of the law, and they just reauthorized this after they had the information from McCabe, but before releasing this memo, publicly releasing it, mm-hmm. they reauthorized FISA with no reforms to fix this problem. So, the Democrats have their own hypocrisy going here. Schiff's screaming and yelling in his attempts to try to get this memo not released about all the sources and methods we're going to compromise. When you read that memo, there ain't no sources and methods in there. Mm-hmm. And he looks like a fool. Schiff just looks like he was the chicken screaming, the sky is falling. And the sky is not falling as far as that goes. But it is very clear that one of the critical bases for the counterintelligence investigation into the Russians' involvement in the 2016 race would have never happened but for the most successful opposition research project in the history of the world, that being the Hillary Clinton-funded Steele dossier. Which
was almost hypothetical.
Every Oppo research guy in the world has got to be so jealous of these people. Oh, my gosh. They got the FBI to come after their opponent.
Oh, yeah.
How great is that?
Oh, yeah. It's a great...
trash.
Ashton Kutcher for Attorney General, and it's Washington punked for this. But there's also another side of this that makes me wonder, what weren't they using these assets to do regarding something that might actually impact law enforcement in this country, while they were devoting these resources to finding out whether a presidential campaign was paying hookers to pee on mattresses in expensive Russian hotels.
Yeah, because that's important information to know in America.
Well, that's the other part is why were they worried
I mean,
about that as much as they were, I don't know, about, human trafficking or anything like that they also claim is important here.
Right. Something I spent a lot of time on as AG. But I would also note the last paragraph of the memo makes it pretty clear that the counterintelligence investigation, and I keep emphasizing that, and I'll come back to it in a moment, began with Papadopoulos in July and some kind of drunken babble he made to a foreign ambassador. And that made its way back to the FBI, and they started their investigation. But if you remember the emails that were released a number of months ago, they show Papadopoulos continually lobbing emails into the campaign headquarters. Oh, gosh, I can set this up with the Russians, and I can do this, and we might get that. And he never got a response they blew him off until mid-August. And in mid-August, Sam Clovis sent some reply that said, oh, fine, go ahead and set it up. It was no longer than that. He didn't tell them how to do it or who would do it or what they would do with it. But that was after all of this. So it really seems like the FBI blew this nothing guy, Papadopoulos, up into the very heart and brain of the Trump foreign policy portion of their campaign.
Ken, can we hang on to you for a moment?
Yeah, I can stay for a moment.
All right, because we got more. I want to find out the impact, and I think the importance as we go forward with those who we elect into office, including the Senate, who approve a lot of these people for their positions as well. And we'll also be joined by another former law enforcement guy, the former Commonwealth's attorney in Louisa County. He's now he's a congressman now from the 5th District. You don't mind if you share a little time with Tom Garrett when we come back?
No, I don't mind sharing time with Tom Garrett. My
all right.
Second Amendment law partner.
Yeah,
no.
That's true. Absolutely. Ken Cuccinelli on with us. Joining us now, along with former Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli on line 1, line 2, former Louisa County Commonwealth's attorney, now Congressman from the 5th District, Tom Garrett. I love this because now I don't have to talk anymore for 15 minutes. You guys can discuss the Nunez Memo here. Ken, I left you with a question from the Senate Conservatives Fund regarding the importance of Senate seats, because in a lot of cases these judges are approved by Senate confirmation. So, and I'm not sure how a FISA judge becomes a FISA judge, but since this guy showed such little in the way of scrutiny when it came to a guy saying, yeah, I vouch for this, it's righteous, let me have the warrant, Judge, maybe that makes these Senate seats more important than we even realized before.
Well, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court selects already existing district court judges to sit by designation as a FISA court judge for a period of time, and there are, I want to say, 11 of them, and they rotate weeks where they come to Washington and sit as the judge of the week, if you will, the jow, I don't know. And then there is a 3-judge court, also appointed by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, that serves as the appellate court for the FISA court. And in theory, a case could go from there to the U.S. Supreme Court, but as far as I know, none ever have. And it is an odd arrangement. I would say that one of the best successes Donald Trump has had as president is his judge selection for the Supreme Court and Neil Gorsuch and the circuit courts. One of the greatest failures of the U.S. Senate has been their complete and total laziness in approving judge nominations. They've only gotten through, I think there's still less than 20. There are more judge vacancies today than when Donald Trump became president because of Mitch McConnell and the laziness of the U.S. Senate. They work about 2.5 days a week on average. It's terrible. But as it relates to FISA, you really have to get to the legislation. The judges are not the path because they're so indirectly appointed. Well, their authority has to be cabined. And, I'm glad to have people like Tom Garrett in the Congress, who's been a prosecutor but is also a civil libertarian. That combination is pretty rare. And I already told you my thoughts on Trey Gowdy's shock and surprise about not sharing all the information that they had with the FISA court, as we now learn. And my shock at him being shocked. But I'd love to hear Tom's take on it.
Tom, good morning.
First off, Joe, good morning. I want to start with irony. I think Ken was born somewhere north of the Mason-Dixon line, and I was born in Georgia. And he talks slowly, and I talk really fast, so go figure. The thing that I'd like to see is, and I haven't heard anybody call for this, the affidavit that underlies the application for the FISA warrant, because that'll shut the Democrats down as it relates to whether or not the Steele dossier was relied upon. I heard Adam Smith, Congressman Democrat from, I believe, Washington, say, and I quote, well, I mean, the dossier wasn't really that big a part of the application. That's not how the law works. Ultimately, there's an obscure court case called Delaware v. Franks that says the fruit of the poisonous tree may not be relied upon to garner evidence for trial. They used the fruit of the poisonous tree by virtue of using compromised information and withholding information from the court when they applied for the FISA warrant. In so doing, they knew that they wouldn't be able to use information gathered for criminal prosecution purposes, but they needed the information in a hurry, which causes you to scratch your head and wonder why they were willing to cast aside the rules of evidence to get dirt on somebody very quickly. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the timeline, it starts to make sense. If it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck and it looks like a duck, it's probably a duck. This is a duck, and the fact that I was able to stand beside Ron Wyden, Democrat, Zoe Lofgren, Democrat, Jerry Nadler, Ted Lieu, Democrat, as well as Rand Paul and Justin Amash and Jim Jordan, and say we need more FISA protections against encroaching on our civil liberties. But those same Democrats are quiet when the federal government is weaponized against its citizenry. It's really troubling. The story here should not be a partisan story. This has nothing to do with Democrats or Republicans. This is at least the third instance I've seen of government power being weaponized against its citizenry absent probable cause or due process. And that, my friends, is incredibly scary and an erosion of the fundamental nature of who we're meant to be as a people. And that's what Democrats and Republicans alike should be very concerned with. And if we don't reel this in now, I don't know when we get it back, and that's troubling.
Hey, Ken,
troubling is a hyperbolic understatement.
Well, and far be it for you to go over the top with anything, and that's my job, Tom. But Ken, before we let you go, the oversight, and Tom sits on the Homeland Security Committee as well. The character of the people we elect. This is important because that's what winds up happening when you talk about the mission creep that has created the swamp. This is not something that doesn't have a place in our society. Law enforcement is important, but the character of the people we put into these roles is.
Well, that's absolutely true, and that's part of the problem with the damage to the FBI. Is their FBI has cultivated for many years a legitimately won reputation for dispassionate, sincere honesty in how it goes about doing its job. And 2016's the decisions they were making at the upper echelons have really besmirched that reputation, and it takes a long time to get it back. And when you pull stunts like this, you undermine your own credibility. Now, they were pulled thinking that the American people would never see any of it. That's part of the problem with how super secret the FISA is. But to Tom's credit, he actually understates, I think, the irony and the hypocritical, sorry, not Hippocratic, that'd be doctors, hypocritical nature of a lot of the, especially Democrats. They just voted to reauthorize FISA, including an enormous number of Democrats who are screaming and yelling about the abuse of this power, but when they had the chance to do something about it, they didn't stand with Tom Garrett and Jim Jordan and other Democrats, as Tom just rattled off, Nadler and Wyden and so forth, who are civil libertarians oftentimes, but they were political hacks when it came to reforming FISA. They cowered. They left the field. And now we're left with this weaponized national intelligence gathering and law enforcement system that I think egregiously violates our constitutional rights, and they do it all the time. And here's a question for you, Joe. Do you think the Democrats are going to be happy with this power sitting where it lies when 2020 rolls around and it's time for the next election?
Absolutely
I don't
not.
think so.
Well, I asked the question: what would have happened if the what was his name, the Blumenthal memos regarding Obama's citizenship had been taken to the FISA court and used as a warrant by Mike Mukasey to surveil the Obama campaign? Ken, I'm going to let you go. SenateConservatives.org, correct?
That's it.
Thank
Tom,
you, sir.
SenateConservatives.com.
Sorry about
Fighting
that.
to get Tom some allies.
Yeah, that's it. Amen to that. Thank you, sir. That is Ken Cuccinelli on with us. Tom Garrett, Homeland Security Committee this morning. Tom, you talked about standing there with Democrats. We pointed out that in the State of the Union, a lot of the backbench Democrats, until Nancy Pelosi gave them the stink eye, would rise to applaud. Violating their marching orders. It seems. Is there hope we can pry loose, independent thinking Republicans and Democrats and put the Fourth Amendment back where it belongs?
Well, I hope so, but I'm afraid that this is a circumstance where when it's not someone's own ox being gored, they don't seem to care. And I think it was Bonhoeffer who articulated the idea that it didn't bother many Germans when the Nazis were after Jews, and it didn't bother because they weren't Jewish. And then he went down the line, and essentially the idea is that if you look the other way when people are doing bad things, sooner or later they'll get around to doing bad things to you. And I'm not going to sit quietly and do that. I think that, Watergate was rightly the low point in America of Americans identifying as Republican because they were ashamed, and rightly so, of the horrific criminality that was perpetrated in the name of advancing a political agenda, right? 23% of Americans after Watergate identified as Republican. Again, I'm not trying to make this partisan, but somebody's weaponized our government against us. And it's not just the FBI, which is 99% great women and men. It's the DOJ that overgirds the FBI. It's the IRS. You could argue that it's EPA, that it's even HHS.
It goes down the list. I mean, even the FDA. Tom, once you allow the power structure to begin, we talked to Chris Horner, author of Liberal War on Transparency and all the other global warming texts as well, last week about this, about how it's just become a society unto themselves, and I think that's where the character of these people needs to be changed.
Well, look, I happened to serve in the Army during the time that President Clinton imposed a political litmus test on, officers above the grade of 07. And, I mean, that begat Leslie Clark and Shalikashvili and Shinseki and the like. We took the war fighters out of the mix by and large. We really, in fact, the ops officer, when I was on brigade staff, had a sign on his door that said, "We're here to protect democracy, not to practice it," which is historically how things worked. But that was a dangerous precedent. That federal service, whether military or non-uniform, should be a meritocracy. That we should judge people, in the words of Dr. King, based on the content of their character and not their political affiliations. I obviously took liberties with the.
Well, but this is the faith in our justice system. This should not just
bother Republicans, and if honestly, if you're listening and you're not a Republican, contemplate a world where due process and privacy rights don't mean anything if you're of the wrong political stripe. That's scary stuff.
TomGarrett.com. I appreciate it, my friend. Thank you for taking some time out with us this morning. I'm glad you're dodging the flu. Stay away from Dave Bratt for now anyway, and we'll talk to you again very soon.
God bless, Joe. Thanks for the opportunity, and keep up the great work.
And keep doing what you're doing. Don't leave the Homeland Security Committee, okay?
Homeland Security, Foreign Affairs, and Workforce, we got some pretty plum assignments. We'll see what the future brings.
Amen. Thank you, sir. TomGarrett.com. Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. Find us online at tertiumquids.org. Read all about our policy papers, and certainly the busiest time here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy as we go through the General Assembly session. Joining us to kick off this week's program is Peter Murphy. He's the Vice President for Policy at the Invest Education Coalition. And we'll recap a little bit this year's School Choice Week. And Peter, welcome to the program. Thanks for taking some time out. How are you doing, sir?
Joe, thank you for having me. I'm doing well.
Excellent. So, was this a busy school choice year? We've had fits and starts as the last maybe 5 to 10 years have gone on. Some states have adopted very successful school choice programs, and others seem to be backsliding. Where are we as we approach and just get past 2018's School Choice Week with the Secretary of Education actually an advocate for school choice?
She certainly is, and school choice has been expanding throughout the country in various forms. A majority of states now have some variety of school choice programs, and it's overall it's working really well, and it really fits well with your radio station's title, the idea of freedom and prosperity. Mm-hmm. That's really what school choice is about. It's about expanding freedom for people to have opportunities that they won't otherwise have. And, as you know, if you're a parent, I'm a parent, our children grow up quickly. We only have them one time. And this is something we want to get right for people. And school choice is helping a lot of families get a better education for their children.
Oh, I agree with you wholeheartedly. We, in our flagship city of Charlottesville, Virginia, about 5 years ago, the school board instituted a program where $1 million a year would be set aside to help recent, and I'm quoting from it, recent high school graduates relearn how to read because they had graduated high school without the skill of reading. And it was with some controversy, and I asked one of the school board members, I said, that's all well and good, and I understand what you're doing, but what about all the other subjects that they weren't able to access during those 12 years they were in the public school system, like history and math and science, that they obviously, it's written in a book somewhere. You need to get this essential root skill, and if we've failed these kids, how are we supposed to go back and now reiterate all the STEM programs and anything that might have inspired them to greatness upon graduation?
It's a tragic story, what you just described, and it's quite common around the country. We see this in New York, or my home state, but it's replete throughout the country. And something as basic as reading really has to be mastered at the elementary level, mm-hmm. and because it's the foundation of everything else, really. And so, look, we cannot give up on the public school system. It's always going to be with us, but it doesn't obviate the need to attack that challenge that you described in not just improving public schools, but expanding opportunities for children to access other kinds of schooling. People with money, people with means, find the best education for their children, whether they send them to private school or whether they locate in a wealthy school mm-hmm. district. But if we really want to address societal needs like that, we've got to have school choice options so people without means or people who are struggling can do the same thing for their children. It's vitally important. We've made progress, but there's plenty more to do.
Peter Murphy with Invest Education. I want to play off your organization's title because it seems like every time I look harder at our educational system, and here in Virginia, it's in our Constitution that access to public education has to be made available on a local level. But it seems like every dollar that is spent on education is spent backwards. Even we talked about the essential learning to read, the basics. We spend a fortune in the high school level and next to nothing at the first, second, and third grade level. And research has shown that if we reversed that and spent more at the first, second, and third grade level, it would reduce how much we're spending at the high school level by a factor of at least 10, and that the scale would completely go off the charts in the amount of money we spend in education and securing it, et cetera, et cetera. And that's just one instance where it seems like schools spend their money backwards.
Well, one of the things is, driving that difference in expenditures that as you get to high school, you have more variety in coursework, you have more specialty courses, you have subject-based teachers as opposed to just an all-day classroom teacher in the lower grades. But your point is nevertheless well taken. Children, if they're going to thrive in high school and handle high school work so they're actually graduated on time and college or career ready, that's the key, being ready for the next step in your life without remediation needs. You have to invest smartly in and get them at a reading and capacity and a problem-solving capacity, which is just the key to elementary school. Elementary school used to be called, when we were kids, grammar school, right?
Yeah.
Teaching them grammar, teaching them reading. And so schools that just don't do that well or don't do that adequately, well, you know what? We need to give parents an alternative so they can have a choice somewhere else. And maybe, and that's the kind of thing that can send the message to the district schools about doing better by kids, or else we're going to lose them to competition, if you will.
We also hear that there's a crisis in education, that we're having trouble attracting teachers anymore to the discipline. And I think, again, this is another instance where public or government education spends its money backwards. If a multinational corporation involved in building something spent very little time and its treasure on the factory floor where those somethings are being built, they would have a bad product and they would fail. And that seems to be, again, if you look at how schools pay their staff, they pay the ones who never go into a classroom and administrate the schools very high, and those who are in the classroom with our students very low. And maybe we should reverse that and make the administrative offices the entry-level position, and only after you've established some gravitas and some time in education do you get to go into a classroom, because it seems like we're putting an undue burden on our newest faces in school, and only promoting those who want to get out of the classroom to the high levels.
Well, look, there's all kinds of systemic challenges, and I've heard even from teacher union leadership about how difficult and how ill-prepared the teaching colleges are in preparing children, in preparing teachers for the challenges of today's classrooms. Mm-hmm. There's also been a problem. One of the blowbacks of the whole Common Core curricula that was kind of a top-down Washington approach to education was that the training of teachers was so inadequate to get them to adjust to this system. So I think it comes back to we have to think about the customers here. And so much of education policy is about the inputs, what goes into schools, as opposed to what are the needs of the parents, what are the needs of the children, and what I think would really upend the system in a much more productive way is when families have an alternative, and that's what school choice is doing. And what we've started to do, step by step now. Starting last December, as you know, when Congress passed the tax overhaul legislation, there was a very important provision in there that gives parents another means to access K-12 school choice, and that is to use what's called 529 accounts, that they could save their money and help pay for their children's education in an alternative setting, something other than the district public school where they're consigned to. And so that was a big first step. Congress did that. Congress had not done a real school choice initiative like that in over 20 years. And here's an expansion of 529 accounts, which are used for college, as you know.
Yeah.
Many parents use them. They're very popular for college savings. But you know what? If we don't get it right in K-12 for a lot of families, the kids are never going to go to college.
Right.
The kids are not going to be prepared for college. So this is an important means to get parents to invest in their children earlier than that and get away from a public system that may not be doing right by them. And again, public education does right for a lot of children, but for a lot of them, it's not. And we can't afford as a nation to continue this kind of subpar approach that affects millions of children negatively.
Mm-hmm. Well, and certainly I wanted to get here to this point because of all the things that, and as a Federalist myself, I don't want the government dictating to our local schools.
Mm-hmm.
But it is something, and these are some of the things that I think have brilliantly been put forth that on a federal level help us down here at the local level. How far into Virginia's school choice program? It's very similar. Virginia, Florida have some very interesting school choice scholarship foundations. One of my concerns with it is it's still the state says to businesses, put money into this scholarship fund and then we'll dole it out to people we determine need it. I don't know if that really qualifies as school choice if the state is still determining who gets the money rather than the parent saying, I just want to use it. Do we run the risk of thinking we've fixed school choice if we've set up those scholarship funds?
Well, the scholarship funds in Florida, that program has been on the books for 17, 18 years now. The Virginia program is much more recent. I think it got passed in 2012. It got implemented in 2013, and it's been a slower growth. It's a much smaller program. I think it's only $25 million. But what that particular approach does is, in effect, it uses the tax code to get people to donate more money into these charitable C3 organizations that provide scholarships for kids. And how they typically operate is these are nonprofit organizations. They're not government-run entities. Now, the government, the laws that have the scholarship tax credit laws have certain criteria. They want to make sure that, like, for instance, there's a random selection process. It's not the government choosing, as I understand it in Virginia. It's not them choosing who gets it, but it's if you're oversubscribed, if your scholarship fund has more applicants than scholarships available, it's a random selection. There's criteria to make sure that kids have an equal chance of obtaining these scholarships. And so ultimately what a parent does is it takes that scholarship that they're awarded and chooses the school they want to send their child. So that's been a very effective program in Florida, in Pennsylvania. Those are mature programs. Virginia's is a little newer, as I mentioned. But I think it's a very effective means to give more parents more access to educational choices, giving them a scholarship that helps them meet that marginal cost that would drive their kid to another educational opportunity.
We're visiting with Peter Murphy, Vice President for Policy at Invest Education Foundation. The Invest in Education Foundation, investineducation.org is their website. And Peter, let me ask you about Blaine amendments. We have the grandfather of them all. It's called the Virginia Act for Religious Freedom. It was written by this guy Jefferson. It was passed by this guy Madison, fairly well esteemed in American history. But school choice opponents point to it and say you can't give tax money to parochial institutions. It's banned by Jefferson and Madison. You all are constitutionalists. Why are you trying to get this done? But then there are states that have used Medicaid as a precedential program that says, no, the money is going to the parent, not the parochial school that may wind up with it, but it's the parent's choice. I think the Nevada and Arizona school choice laws are similar to that. Am I still barking at the moon that people will think this? Have we just gone too far away from being able to discuss the feasibility of real school voucher choice in up against Blaine amendments, or is there still movement towards some people understanding it this way?
Well, the Blaine amendments are a very dubious constitutional setup, right? In many states, at least 30 to 40 states have Blaine amendments. And, there's been all kinds of motives about what drove them in the first place. But the bottom line is what we have today in recent case law by the Supreme Court has determined that, indeed, as you point out, these programs are designed to go to families. Okay, the government, it's been determined, is taking a neutral stance toward religion. It's not favoring one set of schools or one religious sect over another. It's the parents that are deciding that. And that happens in a variety of government programs. You mentioned Medicaid. How about the GI Bill, right? Everybody's heard of that. The GI Bill does not restrict your choice of where to take that stipend for military personnel. And so,
True.
So school choice at the K-12 level is simply a continuation of a government-neutral approach to religion. It's leaving it up. The money is going to the parent. The parent's deciding what to do with it. And that's how fundamentally they're structured. That's how the tax credit scholarship programs are structured. That's how the voucher programs are structured. And, the 529 account's the same thing. Government's giving you a tax benefit, and you, the parent, are deciding where you're going to spend that money when the time comes, either in K-12 now or in higher ed.
What about charter schools? States, and I've learned this quickly, that I used to think I knew what charter schools were until I came to Virginia, where charter schools have to be started by the school board. And I'm thinking, hold it, then the whole point of a charter school is it's not run by the school board. And places like Pennsylvania, where they're very innovative in their way of working charter schools, where they actually go out and try to get rocket scientists to come in and get kids excited about science, not just teach them the nuts and bolts about it and those kind of things. What's the future hold for charter schools in the country and as we go through the next 2 to 3 years?
Well, charter schools have been around since the early 1990s. They started off in Minnesota, and overall, they are very successful public schools that have both increased accountability and improved results for children, generally speaking, across the country. But something you alluded to is a fascinating debate, and that is you have about 44 states now with charter school laws on the books. And the content of that law specifically has a lot to do with the effectiveness of the schools. So in New York, in Minnesota, in Massachusetts, these are what they call strong charter school laws. They allow a lot of freedom to operate. They don't dictate your design. And ultimately what a charter school is it's a contract school that's independent of the school district.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have a state like Virginia or Rhode Island and some other states have these, it's ultimately under the canopy of the school district. Well, it defeats the whole purpose of having an independent contract school that operates. If all we're doing in the charter school law is creating more of the same, well, it's charter in name only. It's ultimately not going to have the ability to do any better than what the district schools are laboring under now. And so that's why the specific law of a state is really determinative, I believe, and I've seen this, as to how effective a charter school is. And in Virginia, that weak law that you mentioned is going to have a negative effect ultimately. But generally speaking, charters, if done right, have been very effective across the country.
Oh, I've seen some remarkably innovative things. There was one a school in Philadelphia, in one of the poorest parts of the city of Philadelphia. They allowed the school to operate on their own as a charter school and do mentorship and upper class mentoring lower grades and things. And it had remarkable success, not just in the schools and in school achievement, but in the neighborhood, where kids became invested into their own neighborhood rather than just bussing them out and teaching kids the only way up is out. And if it actually turned the neighborhood around the school around, so you can have impact even beyond the classroom doors, Peter. So crystal ball time, from where you sit at investineducation.org and the whole group there, I'm sure you talk about what the future will bring. Certainly this 529 law was surprising and exciting to see, but what do you see both federal and locally? Maybe the federal government drives some local innovation with tax policy. I don't know. What is the crystal ball telling you about the future of school choice in America and specifically for our views, Virginia?
Well, we're looking to build on the success we saw in Congress and trying to do more for propose additional changes that Congress can make without any sort of interference in state policy. We want to avoid any one-size-fits-all. We want to avoid any sort of dictation to the states themselves. But Congress has a number of things it can do. For instance, we'd like to see them help military families have school choice and have better access and alternatives, because they sacrifice enormous amount. Virginia has a huge military population.
Mm-hmm.
Well, these military folks have children, and their schooling is not always up to them when they're deployed somewhere or they're assigned to a particular base. And so we want to see those families, like the soldiers get the GI Bill, we want to see their children have an effective GI Bill. Have their children be able to use an education savings account or a scholarship to make sure that they're in the best educational setting they can be in. So we want to advance that. We want to look to people like a Tom Garrett, who represents your area in Charlottesville. Dave Brad is nearby. Bob Goodlatte's nearby. You got some pretty serious members of Congress from that area who can make a difference here. Dave
Brad.
Tom Garrett. Brad, I know Tom Garrett, and I think Dave Brad as well. They're both on the Education and Workforce Committee. They can be very helpful in advancing this kind of thing. We want to see policies to expand 529s even further to help homeschool families, for instance, with their expenses. We want to see, an expanded scholarship opportunity. So, using the tax code in particular is a very effective means, because you're not, you're not sending mandates to states and school districts, but in fact using the tax code to go directly to help parents, to help their children. So those are a couple of things that we're looking ahead and doing. And again, it's going to take key people like Mr. Garrett, Mr. Goodlatte, Mr. Brad, and their colleagues across the country to make this happen. And we think we can be successful. But it's going to take effort. But that's what we're set up to do.
Well, and I certainly reach out to anyone who espouses progressivism and under the banner of it's for the children, and I hear it frequently around budget times locally, that if you're really about what's for the children, think about some of this stuff and visit Peter and all the folks at investineducation.org. Peter, thank you so much for your visit this week. It's been a joy having you, and hope to have you back very soon to celebrate more advances in school choice and parental control over education.
Joe, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you again for having me on.
Thank you very much, and thanks for joining us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.